bright-eyed and bushy-tailed on a what is it? It feels like a Friday morning, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. It's funny. We're the just before the 4th of July.
Yeah, yeah. This is Thursday before the 4th of July on a Friday, so it's a big weekend coming up. And we're here in the studio. So let's rock and roll.
Absolutely. Well, as you are,
So
you
ready.
know, I'm
Countdown.
yeah.
3.
I don't know how those companies effectively stay in business in the future.
What you two are doing is a boundless mindset.
Thinking that you weren't going to have to learn a lot. Well, you made a huge mistake.
It's the wrong place I feel safe geeking out is
It's
here.
here.
There's a reason why we chose technology and not marketing.
I still love that intro.
I do too. It makes me laugh every time I see Paula
It does
too.
make
And
me laugh.
he's such
When
a,
we have guests
he's,
on, I think it kind of surprises them a little bit.
oh yeah. It's always interesting, isn't it? Like when you ask questions of folks, it's always, even if you tell them ahead of time, like, hey, here's some of the things we're going to cover, then you ask a question. It's like, there's always that like hesitation.
Yeah, because they don't really know what to
Anyways.
expect, right? And then they get on, and they're like, "Oh wow, there's like a it's like a real intro thing coming on." It's
Well,
funny.
it's funny. Hey, so everyone listening, welcome. We're
Yeah,
excited about 250th anniversary of the country coming up in a couple
yeah,
days,
wow.
which is big news, obviously. And we're very excited to be here with all you. And we've kind of a little bit of different approach for today. We've got some more guests lined up next week, but this week, Howie and I are going to just share a few things. And actually, my partner Howie is going to. We decided that we once before we spoke a little bit about sort of vendor management. As technology leaders, how you manage your vendors is like one of the top 5 things that you do as a senior technology executive. And and I've had an opportunity to work with Howie for many, many years, maybe over 25, I believe.
Yeah,
And
I think it's 30.
yeah, it's just crazy.
Yeah, it's
And
crazy.
the he in my mind is really kind of a consummate you know partner, strategic partner. And we were talking a bit the other day, and he was sharing some of his best practices, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I'd never heard him formally communicate it before. It's funny. I've been on the receiving end of it. I've experienced it. We work collaboratively on many things, but I've never had it. And I just thought it might be interesting for all of you to hear, from someone who, I consider sort of a very, very capable strategic partner, how they approach their business, and maybe what you might should consider looking for as you're choosing your own partners, and what represents maybe best in class in certain cases, and things that you should expect from your respective vendors and partners. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Howie, and we can talk about a few things, and then we'll kind of like dive in and
Yeah, we'll dive in. We'll dive in
see
for
where it
sure.
goes.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm kind of excited about it. It is something that a couple years ago I was working with my own consultant. So I'm a consultant. That's what I do for a living. I have for a long, long time. Really, actually coming up on 40 years. If I've known you for almost 30 years, then I've been doing this for almost 40, which is kind of
Wow.
crazy. I can't even imagine. Like, never even thought I would be alive this long, much less still here going at it. It is a labor of love, right? We've talked about like the stuff that we do today. Like, I do it mostly because I love it, right? Not as much because I have to do it, but because it's fun. Like, I really, really enjoy what I
Yeah,
do. So
and we've also had that conversation with the audience before too. But like, I remember commenting years ago when I met my wife, and I came for dating, yeah. Oh no, I think we just got married, and I remember she's finishing up college, and I picked her up late one night, and she's like, "Where were you? Like, what'd you do tonight?" And I'm like, "Oh, I was at work." And she was kind of like, "Oh, you worked late?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I was working on this software thing." And she's like, and she couldn't believe I was still working. And I was like, I go, and she goes, "Well, you work a lot. And that must be a lot hard to do all those hours." And I said, "Yeah, but I said it's sort of like half work, half hobby,
uh-huh.
and and I think for folks that really love what they do, you know, I mean, it doesn't mean that you don't want to have work life
Right,
balance, obviously, but for
right,
folks,
right.
you have to really love what you do, I think, in order to be successful in this field of
Yeah.
technology because it changes so darn fast that, if you don't like to learn and read and keep up and stay in touch with, your network and everything
Mhm.
else, then
Right.
which requires real work. I mean, it requires you have to be on the offensive, I think, if you're gonna be effective. And then the reality is that a lot of folks are passive. And I don't know.
Right.
I think it's more problematic, and it's going to get even worse if you think of
There was
the
a,
slope of the curve here.
kind of to what you said just a moment ago. There was you reminded me of a book. It was called Leading Geeks. It was written in the 90s. I actually actually spoke to the author, had a chance to have dinner with him and chat with him. And, but I cannot remember his name because it was like 35 years ago, or 30 years ago. But, the premise of the book, one of the things that he said about the book was, in the book about leading geeks, was that technology people, especially like IT people, they will work all day. They'll go to work, they'll work all day, they'll be on their computers, right? They'll go 8, 9, 10 hours a day, and then they go home and they lift up their computer and they're doing technology things at home, right? And he goes, I don't think that like people that are in accounting and finance do that. Like when they leave the office, they don't go home and like pull up a spreadsheet for fun, right? So it's like it's completely different. It's a completely
Yeah,
different animal. I just thought that was
I
funny.
also think it's kind of a lot more like people who are attracted to, like, I don't know, whether it's a crossword puzzle or it's problem solving, don't you think? I mean, so much of what we do
Yeah,
is problem
everything is
solving.
problem
So
solving.
it's,
Yeah,
and so the wonderful thing about roles like ours is that there's constant reward. Unfortunately, there's also constant failure.
pressure.
Yeah, or but like, you have like daily failures, I mean, on
Yeah,
a regular basis. Oh, you write code, it doesn't work, you write code again, it doesn't work. It's you iterate, you finally get it to
yeah,
work.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
a little moment of celebratory success,
yeah, yeah,
and then you gotta move on again, but
yeah.
I think it's
Especially if
those
you're in a
moments
role
of
where there's,
success that kind of
yeah.
keep the whole thing kind of moving forward, which is
Yeah, if you're
exciting.
in a role also where you're responsible for a lot of different things, not just like say one thing. I was talking with my wife the other day, and she's like, "How'd your day go?" And I'm like, "Is was it a good day or was it a bad day?" Or what was the way she answered? She asked the question like, "Is everything okay? Is everything good?" And I'm like, I have so many things going on that it's almost virtually impossible for everything in a given day to be good and everything in a given day to be bad. It's always a mixture, right? There's always
Yeah,
things that are challenging and there's always things that are good. It's very rarely just one way or the other.
absolutely.
All right, guys. Well, before we get started and dive into this, do us a favor. If you get value from this show, please give it a thumbs up on the show there that you're listening to, whether you're on Spotify, YouTube, which is probably the most popular venue for our show, and the original Apple podcast. Give it a thumbs up and please subscribe. The other thing, too, is do us one more favor. Share it with someone you know that you think might also get value out of it. All right. I have one more thing I'd love to dive into is before we get into my world of consultancy is the Ford Motor Company article that came out this week.
Mhm.
Came out in Bloomberg, The Verge, TechCrunch, Computer World, and others. A lot of people picked it up. And basically, Ford admitted that it had to rehire what they call graybeard engineers, which is kind of an interesting term. I don't know if you looked into that term, right? And it was very recently, and it was approximately 350. So it was not a trivial amount of people. And Charles Poon, who's the Ford VP of Vehicle Hardware Engineering, was quoted as saying, mistakenly, we thought that by just introducing artificial intelligence and ingesting the design requirements that we had, that would produce a high quality product. Artificial intelligence is fantastic, but it's only as good as the information you use to train it. So what went wrong? Supposedly, in recent years, Ford underwent massive workforce reductions, shedding thousands of salaried white collar positions while pivoting hard towards AI. To repair the damage, Ford brought back 350 highly experienced former employees and specialists. And rather than sidelining technology, these veterans are being used to bridge the gap between automation and human expertise. So, right now, their responsibilities include mentoring junior staff and training younger engineers, rebuilding the data pipelines and retraining Ford's underperforming AI systems, using real world engineering judgment, and 3, catching defects manually before components ever reach the assembly floor. Oh,
Wow, there's like 5 stories wrapped up in that one you
Yeah, yeah,
know,
yeah. Let's unpack that for a
overview.
second.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, on the surface, it's I mean, there's not a big surprise to a lot of people, right? Like, I mean, as you jump into AI, I mean, the one thing I don't know what the particular systems that they were playing with were, but many companies, like including ours, have made some really good progress, but we haven't yet fully built out highly scalable, complex systems. There's a difference between knocking out an AI app that's used internally or even for external customers, but
Mhm,
the what's the scope of work is modest, or
mhm.
scalability requirements are modest, and it's functional. It also depends on the nature of the AI, right? Like, I mean, there's so many people who roll these things out. Like, I think the whole thing, it looks like, because of your reference to QA, I mean, testing is like has become, it's always been critical. Now it's gone
Right.
from it's the almost utmost importance now, right? Because now it used to
Yeah.
be everything was deterministic, right? Like, you kind of knew, you wrote the code,
Right.
the software worked or
Right.
didn't work, but it
Right.
was kind of binary. You know what I mean? It
And you
wasn't
were the
usually like
human
the
that was
software worked
writing
and
the
then stopped
code.
working.
Right,
But
and you're the human that's writing the code, and you're doing your own testing, and you're running it through this, and you're running it through that, and then by the time you hand it to QA, you kind of expect that they might find some defects and things like that, but you kind of expect that it's going to work, right? But now when
yeah,
things
well,
go to QA,
yeah, yeah. Well, or now they go through QA. I mean, like, the challenge is that it's not, it depends how you're using it. Are you using it for it to, like, come up with solutions that are 100% accurate, or are
Mhm.
you using it, and I just think 90% of the challenge when people do those things is how the expectation that they're going into, you know, um, whether they're training their own models, leveraging some different model, but I think there's another little thing wrapped up in the Ford one. The gray beard reference reminded me of some of the more of recent layoffs, whether it's like Google or Meta or some of those other larger companies. One of the things they don't say in those layoffs when you, like, double click on them, is that a lot of them too, I mean, they'll oftentimes, and not the case of Ford, but they'll oftentimes come out and say, oh, we're reducing staff because of AI, and the implication being that we're spending so much money on AI data centers and other sort of things that we have to let staff go, or
Mhm.
blah, blah, blah. They're not necessarily yet saying it's due to productivity improvements, although there's some of that too. But a lot of it too is, if you notice by the graybeard references, they'll let go some of the more seasoned engineers, both because, in part because they've been on their payroll for a lot longer, and they're
Right,
more expensive.
yeah.
And so when they let them go, in this case, like, I think there's probably a little epiphany of, like, oh, guess
Uh-oh.
what? Our app that we test internally doesn't scale, or results vary widely.
Yeah, it's a
It's
Scooby Doo
but I
moment,
mean,
ruh-roh.
yeah.
I
It's
also wonder
anyways.
how many of these graybeards, it wasn't clear as to, are these people that they laid off, in the last couple years, or are, early retirement, things like that, right? The
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, yeah. Who knows how they hit retirement, but but it is a kind of a wake up call for all of us listening. Everyone participating in this journey of AI, and we're all learning at a accelerated clip.
Yeah,
And the watchword is, the devil's in the detail.
right,
And QA has now become exponential. It's amazing when you think of AI. QA has now become so much, much more important than it's always ever been. It's always been critical, but now it's kind of taken on this, like, superhuman, expectation that people have. The other thing too, if you read recently with Mythos and other, LLMs coming out with, that will perhaps sort of identify and, um, create issues where it'll identify openings, if you will, for bad actors to
right,
exploit, with
right,
different technologies. I mean, that's going to open up another, like, area too, which is patch management. You know what I mean? Like, another area where, like, if you think about it, it's like companies always tried to be pretty good. I don't know if anyone I'd ever talked to as a CIO or senior technology leader ever said, Oh yeah, we're great at patch management.
Yeah,
Like it
yeah, yeah,
just
yeah, and
never
nowhere have
gets
I've worked
said.
has it ever been, like, at the top of the initiatives list, right? It's just this
No, not
it's this
at all.
thing
Like,
that "Oh, Matt does it over there," and where are we at with
100%.
that anyway?
Or and it's on your list and you want to make sure that people are being diligent. But again, it wasn't like the CIO is getting a report every Friday that says, where we are with patch management. They
Right.
will now. It's
Yes.
good, and it's gonna be fascinating. And I feel bad in advance here for small, medium-sized businesses that perhaps don't have as rigorous a cyber practice or maybe an
As much
ops
resource.
practice. You know what I mean? Because it's going to require some thoughtfulness in terms of how new releases are applied and
Yeah,
rollouts
yeah.
take place and timing considerations and whatnot. So again, a little bit more kind of buyer beware, I guess, as we kind of get into this, as we mature with this journey of AI.
Yeah, yeah, the cat and mouse game has gone to a new level, and AI continues to be the great exposer. That's what I call it. It's the great exposer. It's
Yeah,
it
I
ex
saw
it
where
it's exposing things that, like data. We've talked about data in the past, but this is the first time we've really talked about it exposing well, in this case, it's not really exposing QA, it's, really just putting a premium and on how important QA is, and it's really forcing QA organizations or QA groups, QA leaders to really have to up their game, right?
yeah, what's interesting about what you just said? I'll throw another log in the fire too. It's like whether it's QA, whether it's patch management, whether it's data quality. And we've been saying data quality for a while now. So,
Mhm.
because obviously, as we got into data warehouses and analytics and stuff, data quality became pivotal. But, where it's getting really kind of exposed too is that it used to be though it used to live with DBAs and analysts and BI folks and engineers,
Right.
and we had a working relationship where we knew what data was good, what wasn't, how to work around it. Once you start exposing it to employees, I mean, like the citizen developers and others, you can't do that anymore. You can't sort of like hide imperfections.
Mhm.
And so it creates another level of how you build your sandbox, how you create your semantic layers, and other sort of things that are now challenging. The other thing, and I'll say this is a positive kind of like patch management. I mean,
Mhm.
when I say patch management, I say it's a positive only in the sense of like it forces us to kind of mature, and
Yeah.
put more discipline and professionalism around how we do that. I would say the same things happening with data. And I would say in particularly unstructured data. I mean, unstructured data, if you think in your entire career, I say this to anyone listening, if you think about your company, you think about your unstructured data, whether that's in the form of, you know, text or audio or video or in the form of, different documents and procedures and other things that you have in your company. A lot of that material tends to like lack owners oftentimes. It's
Mhm.
either ownerless, it's not rigorously maintained. There's oftentimes a lack of structured metadata affiliated with all that information. And as you want to now start processing it, querying it, whether it's through MCP or, through APIs or, just chat, it creates issues. And so we're going through that right now, which is like, hey, who owns the metadata? I mean, who owns our metadata? Excuse me. Who
Mhm.
owns the data, the unstructured data? Like, what is the metadata on this thing? What is the data accuracies? How do we do what chunking algorithms are going to be most efficient in order for us to
Right.
process this,
Right.
into our databases? It's kind of funny. All these little imperfections that we had historically, where someone before would say, "Oh, I need a copy of that unstructured data," and somebody would point them to a, a tome of of content. Some conflict. I just have this vision of I always tell people like our Confluence environment reminds me of like a hoarder's basement. It's just like it's just if you said to someone like, "Hey, I'm looking for that documentation," they're like, "Yeah, it's down there."
It's down there, yeah,
It's
somewhere,
yeah,
yeah. Try not to
and
trip over the cords.
yeah, 100%. Now it's like all those things get exposed, So I think I guess the way I like to think of it, we're all cleaning our basements now.
Right,
So
right, we're
if
all
you're
cleaning the
listening,
basement.
clean your
Yeah.
basement because it's people are now going to be looking for those things that you've tucked in corners, and they're going to need a table of contents in this stuff.
Yeah, and it's funny because it kind of gets back to what I've been talking about a lot too. This sort of tails back to this issue of whether or not AI is taking our jobs. And, for sure it's going to be taking over jobs in the business world that are routine, right? Some of these white collar jobs that are routine, data entry, all these types of things. But in IT, I don't in IT, from what I can see at the ground floor where we're working, the things that we're involved in, I don't think we've ever been busier. There's so much going on, and what you're talking about is kind of an example, right? Because all of a sudden now we're having to take stock of our data and make sure we have owners and now QA, and then there's always been this insatiable appetite for IT systems, if you will, right? So the business has this long, we have a capacity. Let's say we have a capacity to develop this much and put into production this much, but there is
Yeah.
this there is this almost bottomless pit of demand for all the things that we could do to automate and all this kind of stuff. So now, if our capacity was here with AI, our capacity's gone up, right? Very, very fast. We can do a lot more faster, but that list is still long, right? So now we're
Yeah,
so now we're
totally.
actually doing more. We're actually producing more. And by the way, that puts a lot of stress on the infrastructure, right? Because we have to productionalize this stuff. All right.
Yeah,
We have
you and I were talking about, I always get his name, the CEO of NVIDIA. What's his name,
Yes.
Howie?
Yeah, Joseph Wang.
Um,
Yeah.
Joseph, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he was talking about this not too long ago,
Mhm.
and in his world, they're adding more engineers, right?
Yep.
Because of exactly what you just said, which is, hey, I got a queue that's, 200% bigger than the amount of engineers could ever develop against.
Right.
I think that's true for some companies. I think other companies, though, a lot of it's going to depend on the nature of the company and the nature of their queue
Sure.
and how they, derive monetary value. Because I think other companies will look at that and say, all right, like I can get more done with less effort. I think it'll have impact on different classes of employees. And it's,
Yeah.
I think, again, like I know it's an overused expression, but the devil is in the details. And, you know, it's, and if you, but it's going to get tricky for junior people, you know what I mean? Because if you think about it, almost always it's going to start at the bottom and work its way up. Right. If you think of it, Howie, some things you and I do, you and I are both on the creative side, but like, and we've used a lot of different third party companies over the years to get things done. Right. I
Right.
mean, if you're kind of in the art space or design space, oh my God, has that now
Yes.
like gotten
Yeah.
better?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like you can sort of absolutely see how, it's going to impact headcount. It's just, it's going to be very uneven, I think, in terms of how AI does that. It's going to vary quite a bit on a company and the nature of its business and
Yeah.
the
You
skills
use the term
portfolio.
classes of employees, and that's kind of what I was referring to earlier. I think the
Yeah.
class that I'm talking about right now is information technology, right? So in the IT class of people, and that whole junior senior thing does apply as well. But I think just generalizing in sort of the IT class of people, I've never seen us busier. That's just my observation of what's going on. We're moving faster and a little bit more. I keep using this word a little bit more frenetically than we ever have because there's
Well,
just
if
so
you
much,
think about
so
it,
much
like
going on.
if you think about the GDP in the US or in other countries too, obviously, but just in the US where we are, you think of how much more productive. You think back, we first met, and we've talked
Right.
plenty of times before, just the advent of moving away from the mainframes and moving to client server and then
Mhm.
web and mobile and data and cloud and AI. And it's like, but to your point, you're getting, I don't even know the ratio now, but you're getting your 10, 20x more productive than you were
Yep.
back then.
Right.
But all those dreams that people had about like you're gonna now have a 3-day work week and stuff like, and those seems like you still get the same kind of work week. You're just
Right.
able to get squish more content, more value, if you will,
Right.
for
Right.
the
Right. Right.
company kind of into that space, which in turn drives productivity, which in turn,
Right.
on a company on a country level, drives GDP growth and other things. So I think it's funny. You get exponentially more work done and more capabilities and
Mhm.
things.
But then there's more
It, it,
expectation.
there is, and
Yeah.
that, and the key thing too is the slope of the curve. I mean,
Mhm.
we thought it was pretty steep when we went from web to mobile to data to cloud. Like that felt like, a fairly, significant transition.
Right.
And that's nothing compared to what we're experiencing now. I
Right,
mean,
right, right.
nothing, because
Yeah.
it's you can't go a day. And literally, I mean, how many different feeds do you get a day on AI updates? And there's not a single day that goes by that I'm just like, wow, that's amazing. Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I should check that tool. Oh, I got a list of like 15 things in my. It's almost, I now have I've added to my reading list, my tool list
Mhm.
that I have to like look at.
Right, right, right. And maybe we're in a bell curve, right? So maybe right now it's just this it's this acceleration of tech, of application of the AI technology and us applying that kind of thing. And maybe there's a drop off on the other side, right? When things kind of stabilize. But I don't know. I don't know. We'll have
I
to
don't
see.
think so. I don't
I
think
don't
so
think
though
so
this time.
either. Thinking it's just
I
going to
think
keep
this is. I
the
think this.
technology will
Well, or
keep
maybe
going, and
it's maybe.
we'll
Well,
keep
maybe at some
evolving
point it
with it.
becomes passe a little bit. But I think the closer analogy is the Industrial Revolution, going
Hmm.
from pre-industrial revolution to the revolution. And I think this is mirrors it. Like,
Yeah.
someone said, oh, when did the industrial revolution end? You're like, I don't know if it did. It's like, once it started, it just kind of transformed, and I
Yeah.
feel like
Right.
with AI, it's the same way. It's like, it's going to go, the curve will get steeper and steeper, and then it'll just become the new norm.
Yep. 100%. 100%. All right. Well, you want to transition
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
our
Let's talk a little bit about sort of.
Howie's four
Sorry, not
pillars.
to interrupt you.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
let's talk about your pillars.
I think conceptually, the way we wanted to frame this, Brian, and you can unpack this really quick, is that, technology executives work with a lot of consultants, right? Both as teams and as individuals over the years. And so we wanted to just kind of dive into what makes a good consultant.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps even more so, what makes a good strategic partner?
I like that term. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
yeah, because I think, I mean, I'm a huge believer of this, is that someone said to me recently, we were talking about is an app, and they had a bunch of vendors on it and different things. And they said,
Yeah.
and I said, there's a difference between vendors and strategic partners. I have lots and lots of vendors.
Vendors.
I have a handful of strategic partners.
Right.
And I would think that most CIOs and senior technology leaders would say the same thing. That yes, if I would look at my accounts payable report, I would have hundreds of folks on there. But if
Yeah.
I just sort of said who are your strategic partners, they could count them on two hands.
Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe even
And
less. Yeah. It
and I
depends.
think maybe your pillars. I think you should go through your pillars
Hmm.
after each one. Or even through a little bit, we can pause and talk a bit more about why those things are so impactful, and what our listeners can learn from that when they're kind of
Yeah.
working with some of their own partners as they go forward. So,
Yeah.
so with that, why
100%.
don't you jump in, and
Yeah, I
we'll
will.
take it
Just
from
kind
there.
of preface this to everybody by just saying, obviously we've talked about this already, but I've been around a long time, so I'm almost older than dirt, right? So I've seen a lot of the transformation over the years, and I've been in this space for a long time. And one of the things that I feel proud of a bit is that all of these years I've been able to work closely with and have really close relationships with people like Brian, right? Like top level IT and engineering executives, relationships that have lasted decades. I've got to do strategic, exciting, and meaningful work, right? Get a lot of appreciation and recognition, right? And also maintain a certain amount of autonomy and flexibility. And I think to get to what Brian was saying a moment ago, what's really, really been cool for me is that almost across the board, but I'll say for the most part, that even though the folks that I was working for, I can call them my clients, I can call them my customers, but really they are, my business relationships, is that even though, and Brian, you can speak to this really quick and validate this or invalidate it, but I think even though they viewed me, that they logically knew, right, that I was independent, right, that I was a consultant in the consultant term, I think emotionally they really viewed me more as like one of their trusted inner circle members, right? And so sometimes it's hard to tell a close individual strategic partner from a staff member, right? Because they're just part of the fabric.
Yeah, no, I think those are the best ones, right? I mean, there's always a distinction, but I think it's the companies like yours, Howie, where we've we have that trusted relationship, right? There's like
Right.
trusted partner
Right.
status that you convey onto folks. Because the other thing too is, a lot of these people were dumping, RIP, and like they're learning RIP, they're learning about sort of best practices from us. They're learning a little bit about, some details that we try to keep, you know, um, private and things like that. So some of those leak out in certain ways as we're working with partners, and you want to trust these folks, right? So it's
Yeah.
finding partners that I think sort of exude your values,
Yeah. That's a good
is
point.
above and beyond sort of just the table stakes of their ability to deliver on their services.
Right. And I'm glad you said that because it's funny. I'm going to go through my 4 pillars of how I deliver and work with my clients and so forth. What's funny is I'm not going to talk about anything that has to do with technical skill set. So
Hmm.
there's a technical skill set, obviously, that we all have, right? There's a technical skill set that I have. There's a technical background that I bring. There's technical experience that, if we're going to just talk about me as the guinea pig here, that I bring to the table, that is
Sure.
kind of a given, right? Like I wouldn't be there if I didn't have those technical skills. But that isn't really what makes the difference, because I find that so many people, for the most part, almost everybody that I work with is super, super, super smart, right? Especially in the technology business. You're just working with inherently smart people, right? These are people that really understand a lot of things. They have a lot of technical experience. They have a lot of business experience. And, I can count on one hand in 30 years where I've gone, wow, that person's just really not a very smart person in IT. People are really,
Hmm.
really smart. And so that isn't really the challenge, right? The challenge is really how you move and deliver on the skill sets that you have. And so, kind of without further ado, I'm going to give you my 4 pillars. All right. So, my 4 pillars are, and I have this. I broke my wrist, everybody. In case you're wondering what's on my, in case you're wondering what's on my, what's on my hand here.
The
I
story
was
for
bragging to
another day
Brian
on
one day
some of this.
about
Yeah,
how
yeah,
I
yeah.
have never broken a bone, and literally broke my wrist like 5 days later. So that's what you get for bragging. So it was on a skateboard with my son, and I probably shouldn't have been on it. So anyway, all right. So I'm going to wave around with my bad hand. So number 1 is anticipate. Number 2 is demonstrate. Number 3 is communicate. And number 4 is relate. And I have them in that order on purpose. It is really kind of a circle, but it all starts with, it's kind of like, think of a circle in the middle. So you have these 4 pillars kind of surrounding this inner circle. And the inner circle I like to call a raving fan, right? So the ultimate goal is that the people that I deliver products and services for are raving fans of what I do or what my team does and what we're bringing to the table. And so that is always kind of the central point and the central focus of what's going on. Everything else just kind of revolves around that. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. And so let me go into the first pillar, which is anticipate, right? So interestingly enough, I'll just kind of a side note. The way I came up with these on paper is that I was actually working with a business consultant who came in and said, "Hey, you've had all the success all these years, in what you do. There's a certain amount of genius you bring to the table." He goes, "How do you do it?" And I said, "I don't know. I just do it. It's intuitive to me, right? Like this is how I've always done it." And he goes, "No, no, no. There's a formula there." And I said, "Well, if there is, I'm not really sure what that is." And so he sat me down for like, I don't know how many hours. It was like a whole day. And this is what he extracted out of me. And I was like, "Oh, wow. Yeah, this is it. This is really what it is." So that's where this came from. So under the anticipate pillar, right? I call it anticipate everything, right? There's a question, an internal question that I'm always asking myself, right? And it's within the context of wherever I'm working and whoever I'm working with. So let's say I'm doing something for Brian and I'm on a mission for Brian. The question I'm always asking is Brian a raving fan of what I'm doing right now or not? Right now, I've known Brian a long time. I could easily rest on my laurels, right, and say, "Hey, Brian's worked with me for a long time. I've got a tremendous amount of personal capital with him, right? I could just rest on my laurels and just kind of go through the paces, but I don't. Fortunately and unfortunately, right? Good and bad. We live in a "what have you done for me lately" world, right? And so we that's just the way it is. And I learned that lesson a long, long, long time ago. And so I'm always asking that question, like, am I really, really delivering? Is Brian a raving fan of what I'm doing right now, right? So that question is at the core of almost everything that goes on, right? So the next point I'll make in the anticipate pillar is playing chess. So I call it chess playing, right? So there's always this mental dialogue going on inside me that says, if this happens, then what's going to happen next? I'm always trying to think two moves ahead. So there's what's happening now, and then that will then happen, and if that will then happen, then the next thing will happen. So in almost every and it could be in the most smallest things. I'm always trying to figure out what will happen next, and this is very, very key to anticipating, to the whole anticipation game, like what's going to happen next. Because what this leads to is it leads to seeing problems coming the best you can. Now, not all problems you're going to see coming. There are going to be things that catch you by surprise, right? And we're going to talk about dealing with problems in a second because it's in the second pillar, but the more that you can play chess, the more you can see problems coming and the more you can get in front of problems coming, either by helping manage them or even ameliorating them altogether, right? The other part in anticipation is really that understanding of who you're working with, knowing their needs, their desires, knowing what their priorities are, and knowing and really striving to understand what their business needs are. So, in a nutshell, that's the anticipation pillar.
Yeah, that's good. I think a couple things just to unpack there, I think,
Yeah.
for those listening. It's like one, if you have a partner who you've worked with before and you bring him into your company, maybe you change jobs, change roles, et cetera, type of thing. The other thing, for the best partners is, how I was alluding to is, he mentioned you could kind of rest on your laurels because someone has past experience and things like that. But, the reality is when you bring somebody that you knew before, like the bar's been raised because people are looking, right? They want to know that like you're bringing people in who can immediately come in and sort of, command respect, who are competent, capable, et cetera, type of thing. So first and foremost, having kind of a repeat partner, while a good thing, because you personally know them, the table stakes kind of go up, I think, in many
Yeah.
ways.
Oh, 100%, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
100% because it's like now you're having to live up to a reputation.
one exactly. Well said.
Yep.
And I think the difference too is how many vendors do we bring in that I brought in where it's like they don't take the time to understand your business or even come in knowing your business or having a general understanding of it. And nowadays, especially with AI, but there's so much information out there. If you don't
Mhm.
have a working knowledge of a general not working understanding of the company, its competitors, the industry it's in, how they're faring, whatnot, like immediately your credibility is just gets thrown into question, if you will.
Yeah.
And and ultimately the ones that take the time to know you, to know me, to know our needs are the ones that, at least start out with a little bit more of a solid foundation upon which to kind of build. So I think that's a great question. I think the first question we could all ask ourselves, by the way, I was thinking how we asked the question, is fill in the blank of one of your customers right
Mhm.
now. Is Bob in finance a raving fan right now of your IT services?
Mhm.
That's a great way for all
Yeah.
of us to think about it too, because we don't always do that, right? Like we all sort of look at it oftentimes. I know I do at times as well. It's just like we're doing everything we humanly can, given the amount of people and staff and project queue, loads and everything else. But we don't always ask ourselves that question. And I was going to talk about a few more other things on his four pillars that talk about not just asking the question, but as you're evolving through projects, how do you kind of continue to kind of keep your eye on the ball in terms of, do you have raving fans? Do you create raving fans? So
Right.
anyway, I like that. So you anticipate everything.
Yeah, I
That's
know. I
good.
want to. I want to add a couple things to this whole question about, is so and so a raving fan right now? It isn't just the big wigs, So Brian's a CIO, right? He's the boss for the most part, and that makes sense there. But what I want to stress is I actually ask this question all the way across the board. So whether it's Brian at the CIO level, or I'm working with literally, let's say, an individual contributor that we're working on a project with, I'm asking that question too. Like, am I delivering for this person? Am I serving this person? Is this person a fan of what I'm doing? So it goes all the way down the board. I think also I wonder sometimes if this question kind of was born out of like survival a little bit, because I remember you, and I can't remember, was it Keith Fulton or one of the other CIOs we were interviewing in one of
I
our
think it's
shows
Bill.
recently? You guys were talking about the fact that you always feel like you at any moment you could be fired, right?
Yeah, no, I think Bill was saying that. I think Bill originally had made a comment,
Oh yes, it was Bill.
um,
Yeah.
that that he's like, I never quite knew whether I was going to get promoted or fired. And we were kind of talking about, like, Andy Grove's book of Only the Paranoid
Only the
Survive, and
paranoid survive.
and I think there's some truth to all that, right? Which is, we earlier on were kind of talking about people who maybe excel kind of in these fields, and we say this about problem solving and things, and that, like I've said, made the comment, and I wasn't trying to lead into this one, but I made the comment that every day you have failures and successes. Like, it's very, very rare that you just finish a day and you're like, everything worked perfect.
Everything was beautiful.
And,
Yeah. Yeah.
and, the system get out on time, and, it's all doing great. I
Yep.
mean,
Yep.
the
And everybody
realities are, is that,
decided, and nobody complained, and
yeah, it's a little bit more like the stock market, right? Like, where things go up and down, and then you want to be able to look back after 3 weeks or a month or 3 months and go, wow, we've made, we're up 30%.
Mhm.
Now, we had a couple days where we were down 8%. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right, right,
But
right.
and so I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it, because I think it's, at the end of the day, you can't measure any individual day, because it's volatile in our field,
Yeah.
and the best partners know how to weather that, and be able to sort of pivot quickly.
100%. 100%. So, okay, let me move on to the next pillar, which is demonstrate. So we started with anticipate, and anticipation leads into what I call demonstrate. So anticipate, demonstrate. Well, the consultant calls it demonstrate. I call it demonstrating control. Okay. And it sounds a little, it sounds a little more nefarious than what it means. It doesn't mean that you're, or that I am a control freak or advocating to be a control freak, but there is an element when you're in a position of responsibility to deliver services, to deliver on an initiative, to deliver on a project, to solve a big problem, that the people that are relying on you to do that want to feel like you're in control of the situation. That's what I really, really mean. Sometimes you don't feel like you are, right? So problems happen, right? Whether you anticipated them or not, problems happen. And the ones that you didn't anticipate are the ones that are the most stressful, right? The ones that just kind of like blow up and you're like, oh my God, we got to lean into this quick. But so here are my kind of points around demonstrating control, what I think is super important. The first one is don't go dark. And you're going to hear this come up about 2 or 3 times in my pillars, which is don't go dark. This is a big one for me, because one of the things that I have experienced in this business over the decades is kind of the technology sort of engineer personality prototype, right? Now, I'm really generalizing here, and it's not in a derogatory. What I'm saying is, I don't mean it in any derogatory way, but we all have kind of personality types, right? There's an archetype, right? And one of the things that technology people generally tend to do when there's a problem is that they go into their cave. They're not running from the problem. They're going into their cave to try to solve the problem, but they go into their cave quietly to try to solve the problem, because I think one of the things that I've observed is that they want to have the answer. And if they don't have the answer, they don't want to tell you anything, which is kind of creates a communication problem. And I'll get into that's my third pillar is communicate, which is a communication pillar. But when you go dark in any situation, no matter uh, how good your intentions are, right? You lose the demonstration of control, because those people that are relying on you don't know what's happening. And so it can seem much more dire than what it really may be. And so just rule number one is don't go dark. Rule number two is the opposite of don't go dark, which is lean in, right? get visible. So it's like the opposite. Instead of going invisible, get visible, right? Lean in, get visible, start communicating, be quick about it, be as prepared as you possibly can, and show up with solutions. Now, so many times when we're in the middle of a problem or a crisis or an outage or whatever it is that we're dealing with, we don't have the solution. We don't know what the solution is. We're in the midst of trying to figure out what the solution is. But this is where it's really, really important to get visible, get in front, and communicate with those who care about what's going on. So it's almost like when the police give a, when there's a crisis and the police give a, what do they call it when the police do a press conference? It's press
Yeah.
conference. That's what it is. It's a press conference 101, but in an informal way, which is, okay, here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. Here's what we're trying to solve. And here's how we're going about solving it. Do you have any ideas that could help us? Right. So now you're engaging the audience who cares into the problem solving. And a lot of times you get great ideas, but now everybody's super engaged in what's going on. So they know what's going on. They know what's being processed. They know what's being tried. They know the timelines, whatever it is, the details that are happening that go through that. So this is really probably the guts of demonstrating control, right? And in my experience, you're going to get to the end. You're going to solve the problems one way or the other. It's the way that you go about it that really, really makes a difference. The other thing, too, in demonstrating control is really pushing through blockers. So many times I'll get, and it doesn't, I know right now I'm talking about, I'm talking kind of within the context of crises. It sounds like crises, but problems can be big and small, right? So you can have small problems, you can have delays, you can have different things that aren't necessarily, huge, big outages and things like that. And you're relying on your team members to get through, to solve these issues, to get to fruition on whatever it is that we're working on. And a lot of times I'll see people, even people on my team, that will run into kind of a blocker and get stopped. And I'll say, hey, so what's going on with this thing? Well, I messaged the production cloud team, the AWS team, and we need them to set up this server container, and we haven't heard back from them. Well, how long ago was that? Well, that was like 2-3 days ago. And I'm like, well, I need you to push through that, right? This whole thing about I drop the ball in your court and then I don't do anything about it is really, really ineffective, right? You have to really own the outcome and really push through whatever blockers, large or small, that come up. And a lot of times they're small blockers, but they cause a lot of delays, right? And then those delays grow into bigger problems and, and big misses and missed opportunities and unhappy customers. And now I don't have a raving fan, right? Brian, you look like you wanted to say something.
Well, yeah, I was thinking as you're talking that, although these are, best practices that you've refined over the years, these pillars of yours, they're really equally applicable to like an IT manager or leader, right? It's like they should be asking themselves the exact same questions, right? Like, your first pillar about anticipating things. It's like, are my internal customers raving fans? And then if they think about their team, like, how does my team handle problems? What is their first reaction? Because how you said something really important, which you're referencing that like press conference mindset, which is at the end of the day, you're probably going to solve the problem the same way with or without the press conference. Like, you know what I mean? You're going to go back, you're going to noodle it, you're going to come up with a solution, we're going to recommend it. But in the case of being overt about it versus being sort of doing something kind of in the dark. It's like people are aware. So whenever there's a problem, the key thing that's important is visibility. To your point, right? It's that
Mhm.
that people they gain confidence from you because they see the confidence in your mannerisms and your how you're going to
Right.
approach it and your thoughtfulness and stuff. Even if they've known you for a long time, it's something you can't take for granted that when there is a problem, that if you don't like sending everyone emails that like, "Hey, I got it. Don't worry about it." Like that works for a day. You know what I
Or an
mean? And
hour.
then, or
Or
some
an
period of
hour.
time. And then when the problem hasn't been resolved, it's kind of like, okay, now what? You know? So I think what you're,
I
maybe
was just having this
translate this.
conversation with
Yeah.
Monica yesterday. That's why I was talking about the infrastructure thing.
Hmm.
And I walk in there, and like, so Monica is at that point. I want to know if Monica's a raving fan right now, and
Hmm.
so she's like, "When are we gonna get to test this system?" And I'm like, "Well, as soon as we can get the infrastructure people to do this." And she's like, "Well, how long is that going to take?" And and then I'm like, I realized at that moment that I wasn't demonstrating control. Right, I
Yeah.
hadn't gotten out in
Yeah.
front, and by the way, this is a small example, right? There's no crisis going on, there's no outage going on, it's not even really a big problem, it's just more of a scheduling thing, it's an expectations thing with the people that I'm trying to deliver a service and a product to, right? It's really in that category, and I realized at that moment, wow, I could, my client, in this case, the person that I'm trying to deliver to, could get frustrated really easy, therefore they're not going to be a raving fan in this moment. So now
Right.
what do I need to do about that? Right. And so
Don't you think? Yeah. Yeah.
I told her at
Yeah.
that point, oh, okay, I hear you. Here's what I'm going to do. Consider it done. And she's like, thanks. And I did. We did that. We got the communication out that we needed to get out. But I had to be reminded by her that I wasn't doing it. And it's interesting how these things play out like that.
The way I think of those things is like on key projects, you want to know if you're thinking of this from like a work breakdown structure,
Uh-huh.
it's almost like, okay, we're on, call it phase two, and phase two encompasses X amount of work, and we're probably 85% of the way through. And so, like in my mind, what I start to do is I get confidence from whoever's running it on phase two, but I immediately switch to like phase three, let's call it, like, which is
Okay.
okay, what comes next? Right. Because, I think the biggest problem that you and I run into oftentimes, and where we've been successful is keeping the cadence moving. Right. Because it's so common that like that everyone does step one, and then there's this hesitation before you get to step two. And then there's a hesitation before you get to step three. And you and I were talking about the cycle sometimes of, you plan, you do a budget, you roll it out. It
Yep.
takes a little while to get everybody organized.
Yep.
You're organized, you're flowing. Then all of a sudden people go on vacation,
I
and
did it.
then
Then summer comes.
and then school starts, and you know what I mean. Like, and it's and all those things. By the way, I think the thing what's important about them is the predictable things.
It's true. Yeah.
And so, for the best leaders, those get factored in. You don't assume
Mhm.
that like you're going to be at the same threshold in the summer that you might be in the spring,
Right.
because there's different, demands and things like that on people's lives. And so, anyways, without beating up a beating this to death a little bit, where, you know, don't go dark, be visible, lean in, don't be passive, and and be professional. I think is another
Yeah.
level in that one too, which is people
Right.
are paying attention. They get their confidence from your confidence,
Yeah.
and that confidence is better expressed in person or verbally than it is just another email.
Yeah. And
We all get plenty of those.
I think one of the things I want to stress here too is that, like, when I go through this and I talk through this, I feel like it's kind of like people are going to be like, no, duh, to me,
Oh, yeah,
right?
probably. Yeah.
Because it just seems so natural to me, right? Now, part of it's natural to me because I've been doing it for a long time and I've been iterating through it and all that kind of stuff. But what I've also found is like, these are the soft skills, right? Because if you remember, what I started out was by saying there's a given here that this is just, we're talking about me as the example here. When I show up on site to work with a client, to work with a Brian, to work with Brian's people, there's a given that I have the skill set to do what it is that we're doing. That is not what we're talking about right now. Those are the hard skills, right? These are the soft skills. And the soft skills, in my experience and my observation and what I've seen throughout the decades, it's the soft skills that make the difference in terms of perception. This is really key. The perception of failure versus success, right? It's
Yeah,
really, really
yeah,
the soft
because
skills.
the hard skills, if you will, are table stakes, right?
They
Like if you
are.
don't have
Yeah,
good developers, then you're not going to do well. If you don't have good ops
exactly.
folks or other
Yeah.
things, but how you communicate, how how you interoperate with leadership, how
Yep.
you know, partner.
Yeah.
Those things are not. I mean, and I think you're right though. If I was listening to this, I'd be probably nodding, going like, yeah, that makes sense, that makes sense. But it's a little bit like like when you go for like whether it's your 7 habits of highly effective people things, right? Like if you look at, best practices in terms of how to run a meeting or how to do anything, we all need constant reinforcement because we all fall back to like bad habits. I
Mhm.
think what
Yeah.
you're saying is this is like your touchstone that
Yeah.
like that you look at on a regular basis, going like, "Oops, have I done this? Am I doing this? Am I learning from my conversation with Monica to
Yep. Yep.
to continue to raise the bar, so to speak."
Yep. 100%. 100%. And
What's your
and
what's your third? No, I'm
I
sorry, to
will
interrupt you.
say that this is what has made the difference for me. What I'm sharing with everybody right now is what has made the difference from me from uh, kind of maybe having a mediocre career or having the career that, that I'm more proud of, right, over the years. So, all right, let's go to the third pillar, communicate, right? All right. First rule in communication, never go dark. This won't be the last time you hear this one. So I beat that one pretty good in the last pillar. So I'll move on. Next one, establish context and purpose. So especially in written communication, but also in spoken communication, one of the things that I have found that a lot of people struggle with or aren't cognizant of, and that I had to learn over the years as well, was to establish good context and purpose in what I'm talking about. So what's context? Context is does the person or the audience that I'm speaking to, because it could be a person, it could be an audience, right? Do they actually have enough background in what it is that I'm talking about so that what I'm going to share with them will make sense, right? And I find that a lot of times we don't slow down enough to actually ask that question really quick. Like, who's my audience? What am I communicating? Especially now, look, it doesn't have to be in every single conversation, every little thing you do, but when you're trying to get communication out, when you're trying to get messages across that are important, right? You really want to understand, does the audience that I am speaking to have the context that they need to understand what it is that I'm about ready to communicate to them? And if they don't, set the context. Now, Brian, I think you'll talk a little bit about like you don't need to like write a book, right? So I was born in California, and like write your whole life story, right? But you want to succinctly kind of like set the context on what it is that you're talking about, so people are like, oh, okay, I got it. I see where we're
Yeah,
going.
well, can I pause you there for 1 second?
100%.
Because you and I have known each other for a long time. It's and Howie would tell you this too. It's kind of really important to know your audience on this stuff, right? Because context is one thing, but also how they like to work.
Mm.
It's like, I've worked with too many McKinsey like contract consultants, if you will, who will come in and they'll be like, okay, bullet one, click. And then it might have 5 words on it. Okay, I read it. And then the person wants to spend 6 minutes talking about bullet one. Then they're like, bullet two. And I'm just like, okay, stop. I can't count the number of times I had to tell people to stop and just put your slides up, leave them up, and then like, if you want to talk to it. But like, I don't need the, I don't know, like, I don't need the like Reader's Digest. Just give me
Oh
sort of
yeah.
the facts and we can each kind of, read, digest and discuss, you know.
I'm laughing on this because I've known you a long time, and I swear to God, talk about like old dogs don't learn new tricks, or just not learning your lesson, or just being a dumbass, I guess. But I only recently realized with you, like I'm gonna say like in the last 9 months, 6, 9 months, that when I put something together for you and it's written, I need to let you read it. You're a reader. Like, like, because a lot of times I feel like, because with certain audiences, I'll put something up and I'll talk through it, and that's kind of what they need.
Mhm.
You actually need the opposite. You need to like read it and absorb it and then ask me questions about it. That's how you like to process. But it took me forever to figure that out because I have my MO. My MO is I'm going to put my talking points up, my
Yeah.
McKinsey bullets, and I'm going to charge in demonstrating control, right? I'm going to charge in demonstrating control, and I'm going to walk you through them, right? And so many times you're like, hold on, let me read it. It's like it took me forever. Now I do stuff for you, and I just put it there, and I just stay quiet until you're ready
Well,
to like
also, like,
start
as
asking
you
me
know,
about it.
Howie, too, the other thing too, when it says know your audience,
Yeah.
is give them information in advance. I just feel like one of the problems with so many consultants is that they want to like feed it to you like a spoonful at a time. And it's just like, give me the deck in advance. Let me consume it. Let me put my own questions together. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Let me like, as opposed
Yeah.
to sort of this drip by drip by drip
Yeah.
model, and which I just find
Yeah.
torturously painful
Yeah.
oftentimes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
but it is a totally get to know your audience type
It
of
is totally get to
model.
know your audience, and, man, I can dive down into that one a little bit. There are times, and this is now where you get into the nuances, right? Where we get to the nuances, and this takes some experience, but there are times when I need to control the narrative, even with you, right? There are
Mhm.
times that I know if I give it to you ahead of time, the kind of like the horses are out of the barn and it's going to get away from me. And so there are times where I do kind of force you through painfully through like, okay, we're going to just take this like one line at a time. Like literally in the PowerPoint deck, like the animation is line number one, line number two, line number three. It's not all the time. And that's the thing. It's like not every approach for every situation. Because and there are certain presentations that you want to give where you really need people to come through it with you in layers. Um, uh, and then there are times where giving them the information ahead of time is the right thing to do. And so, stepping back, really understanding your audience, and then I think where that goes to is like the next word in this bullet is establish context and purpose. Okay, so what's purpose? A very, very smart person once told me, purpose is simply the what and the why. What is this? And why are we talking about it, right? Or why am I explaining this to you? And
Sure.
so that little thing has served me so well, especially with written documentation, right? Especially with written documentation, but also in groups, conversations, presentations, things like that. Like here's what we're talking about, and here's why we're talking about it. And that really gets people like set in the context that you need them to get set so that you can effectively move forward. So something to think about. Also, just kind of in the written thing, I find write linearly, right? So, not to be condescending, but technology people aren't the best writers in the world,
Thank
right?
God for thank God for chat and Claude.
Now, yeah, 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 but maybe this isn't as big a deal anymore with AI, but up until recently, this is a big deal, right? So, I always try to get my teams to like write linearly, right? So context, purpose, what and why, and then fulfill the what and the why, right? In order, right? Otherwise, you just lose people. You're just throwing up all over the page. So that's my thing. Next one, this is a big one for me, is closing the feedback loop, right? So there's a lot to unpack with closing the feedback loop, right? So if I'm communicating to people, first of all, well, actually, let me go backwards. So closing the feedback loop is very specific to this. So as you know, Brian, it's getting my pilot license, right? And so if any of you know anything about aviation, and the military is this way too with instructions are given and they have to be spoken back, right? So if you're coming in and you're talking to a tower in an airline and they tell you to go left, I'll just make it really simple. Uh, you have to tell them that they say, they'll say vector to,
Turn left on this. Yeah.
360, whatever heading that you're headed. Then you have to read it back to them so that they know that you got it, right? Because just because you said something doesn't mean they got it. And this is something that I find is a really, really big hole in communication, not only just in our industry and technology, but just kind of across the board. Well, I told them, well, why did this happen? Well, I told them. I'm like, yeah, but did they understand it? Right? Did you confirm understanding? And this is just a really, really big one. So closing the feedback loop, right, is super important. It's just, especially when things are critical, especially when there's instructions involved, especially when you're really dependent on somebody to get something done, right? Confirm that they have the same understanding that you have. All right. The other one is communicate to all who need to know, but none that don't. Right. This is one that's like really key. A lot of times it can backfire on you to just blast out messages to everybody that you can think of. Right. It just that doesn't work so well. So think a little bit about who really needs to know what it is that I'm talking about and who really doesn't. And then the last one in
Well, can I throw
communication.
one thing there too,
Yeah, yeah,
which
go
I
for
think
it.
is important to someone
Yeah,
listening to this, and
yeah,
everything Howie's saying, by the way, even though he's saying this from a point of view of a consultant, applies if you're a technology leader, right?
yeah.
But the key thing there too, I would just add is know the method of communication that works for the people you're communicating
Yeah,
to.
that's a big one. Yeah,
Because how you communicate to certain people, an email, it's totally fine. But get off your butt and go visit them if you can. The right people and say, hey, I know that was disappointing news about not hitting this release date. I know you probably read the deck. Let me take you through a couple things I think it's important for you to know. I mean, so it's like, I think there's sort of like the communications, and then there's sort of like pausing and looking at your distribution and saying, is everyone going to get this message? Is this the proper form for this message? Or do I need to kind of reemphasize
Yeah.
things to key people, stakeholders, or your
Yeah.
boss, or whoever it might
Yeah.
be, you know?
Oh my God, I'm so glad you brought that up. It's actually an amazing segue into the fourth pillar, which is relate. So relate is really about relationships, right? And so my first bullet here is to be visible. We've talked about this already, so don't go dark, be visible. These are huge, huge tenets in my pillars. One of my favorite axioms is proximity is power. And Brian just brought this up right now, right? Like there are times to send emails and there are times to go talk to people. And it's, and you have to feel your way through this a little bit. But it is something to think about. Like if there is a problem, if there is any miscommunication, if there is just something that is rubbing you the wrong way, put down the keyboard, go talk to the person. Even if it's a Zoom call, right? Even if it's a Zoom call because you're not in physical proximity, get into
Mhm.
as closest proximity as you possibly can with the people that you want to be raving fans, of your work and your products, right? Proximity is power in relationships, proximity is power in business, proximity is power in sales, proximity is power in everything. And the lack of proximity is a problem. I don't know if I could stress that any more. So that's my big one in relationships.
Yeah.
The next one is integrity, right? So being integrous is huge, right? The doing what you say you're going to do, and sometimes you say you're going to do something and for whatever reason it doesn't work out, right? So then you got to go back and say, hey, I know I said I was going to do this, but this is what I ran into, and like I need to change course, or this, something went wrong, right? It's all about that relationship and getting back, and just always acting with integrity. uh, Strive for quality and accuracy. It's interesting that I have this in the relationship category, but I do find that it is a relationship thing, right? I don't, it doesn't really fall in anticipation, demonstrate control, communicate. It's really about the relationship, right? Building that reputation that you're always integrous, and that you're always striving for quality, and that you're always striving for accuracy. Be kind and professional. That's kind of a no duh thing, right? And the other thing I always say is we're global, right? So this is from a consulting standpoint. We're global, meet clients on their time, right? So that's super, super important. And here's what's going to happen if you put all of these things together. You're going to build what I call personal capital, right? So it's like putting change in your pocket, more change in your pocket. The more that you deliver on these pillars on a consistent basis and strive to, like, we're all going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time, right? It's how we show up to solve those, to solve those issues, to make good for those mistakes that makes the difference. And what you're doing over time in the relationship category is you're building personal capital, right? So even though on one hand, I always had that only the paranoid survive, and I feel like, I could be fired, and or I don't have to be fired because I'm an employee. You guys can let me go a lot easier than you can let employees go, right? So for me, it's like I can be dismissed really, really easily, right? But when I have personal capital with the people that I'm trying to make raving fans, it makes problems and the dealing with those problems so much better, because there's capital there. There's grace. I think that's what I'm trying to get to. There's grace for the times when things don't go so well. So
Yeah, totally. And once you build a track record, right,
Mhm.
that grace just expands, right? Because they know that, like, wow, their last 5 projects have all been big successes. We're running in now, we get some headwinds,
Yeah,
and people get it. They're like, okay, no one bats, 600,
yeah,
if you can
right,
hit,
right, 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 right.
over
We're all
300,
human.
you're in the Hall of Fame. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
it's tricky stuff, but I think it's a great list. I think
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear it from you, since I've never heard it verbalized before. So, and I think, if someone's listening to this, all these, as much as we're talking about what we as technology leaders can expect or desire, from our strategic partners. These are also attributes we should be applying with our own respective teams,
Yeah.
right? Like anticipate everything and what goes with that, demonstrate control, communicate, never go dark, to Howie's point, and build relationships. And those relationships, by the way, I mean, I guess I sometimes, we all have strengths. Like I bet you if you took this list, to technology leaders, like we had to rate ourselves on them, we wouldn't give ourselves probably A's across the board, right? We probably are good at some of these and not as good as others. And I think it's a great thing to reflect on, and sort of like evaluate yourself on and your team. It's like, hey, which of these 4 areas do we need to improve on? And, how are we going to improve? And how do we,
Yeah.
reinforce the message, if you will? So,
Yeah.
no, that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that, Howie, with our audience and with me.
Yeah,
I
I'll
know how.
actually add one more thing too that I hadn't thought about
Yeah.
for a minute 'cause I haven't hired like this for a while, but I actually use this for hiring. So one of the hiring methods that I use on my team is group hiring, right? So I might be looking for a certain position and I'll do a group interview to start off with, and I actually have this deck and I run people through this deck because, and I'm hiring primarily for technology type positions. So these are people that are coming in and they want to talk about their technical skills and those kinds of things. And I'm kind of
Hmm.
like, okay, here's how we're going to screen first, because this is what I'm all about. This is what my team is all about. And so if these things
Yeah.
seem silly to you, or you think this is no duh or whatever, like if that's kind of where you're coming from, you're probably not a good fit for our team. So it's that important to me from that standpoint. And I have had people just like in the group interviews just hang up, like just just jump off the Zoom, and you're like, okay, well that was a good self-screening exercise, right? Because you know. So
Yeah. Might as
anyway.
well learn early. You know.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Well, with that, guys, we're going to sign off, but I'll give you our quote of the day. This one's kind of harking back to our story of the day with the Ford Motor Company and the bringing back the graybeards type thing. So this one comes from a gentleman by the name of Charles Babbage. Some of you who know your history may have heard of him. Considered a pioneer of computing back to 1864, right? So this is like abacus stuff, right? And he said, and this is going to be challenging English. On 2 occasions, I have been asked, "Pray, Mr. Babbage, if you put into the machine wrong figures, will the right answers come out? I am not able rightly to apprehend the kind of confusion of ideas that could provoke such a question." Everybody have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank y'all.